Oslo and Utoya were a crime against humanity. It is obvious that in some regards it has changed everything in terms of political debate and how we come to a solution of the problem of Freemasonry infiltrating through ultra-conservatism, nationalism. There will now be a response from the European Union to de-radicalise people who are on the right and who are being radicalised to carry out such attacks as Breivik. Now, Breivik may have had links with the people who were chucked out of the EDL and were ultra-conservatives. Now, there must be a distinction between neo-Nazis and ultra-conservatives, or National Socialists, neo-Nazis and ultra-conservatives. This does not mean that I subscribe to National Socialism. I am a Social Democrat. I'll make that quite clear. But the advances that Thilo Sarrazin made, and Angela Merkel made, and David Cameron, both David Cameron coming from the right of centre, and Angela Merkel as well, and Sarkozy, and Thilo Sarrazin being a Social Democrat, although he was kicked out of his party, have made advances towards having a rational debate on the issue of multiculturalism. So from the very furthest right, ultra-conservatives such as Breivik, who want to kill Social Democrats in Scandinavia, and who fear the EU as a uniting force amongst Europeans against their terrorism. We also have on the far Marxist, cultural Marxist, multiculturalist, extinctionist branch of politics, people who see European civilization and Western civilization as an intrinsic threat and also intrinsically evil, want to mix multiculturalist ideas into the mix of social democracy and thus stifle any debate, any rational debate. It is clear that Freemasonry was a driving force behind the attacks, as Breivik made clear in his own Facebook page. And historically speaking, National Socialists and Freemasons have been enemies. The Third Reich can put them into concentration camps during the Second World War. That is a point of historical fact. If anyone has any idea about the Second World War, that was one factor in it. Now, after the Second World War, the social democratic university systems of under Attlee, who was a British Prime Minister, and also under Adenauer, who was a German conservative Chancellor, and other leaders such as Willy Brandt, tried to change the establishment to social democracy. Before that, the influence of ultra-conservatism in the establishment before the 1940s was openly Freemasonry type, because Churchill even described himself openly as a Freemason. This group of people who have dedicated themselves to evil have now unleashed their terrorism in Oslo through radicalising one man. Although his views may be part of a wider cell, and there are thousands of these people, but the two cells that he's speaking of may well carry out attacks every 9 to 12 years. This is what he spoke about on the BBC. They refer to themselves as the Knights Templar, which is also a Freemasonry group that was in the Middle Ages, and a reference to their overall cause, but they are of evil. But they are trying to drive conservative nationalists, who I would say should have a social and humanitarian conscience, and social democrats need to have a national conscience, a patriotism for the EU and Europe, but they're trying to drive conservative nationalists towards terrorist activity. This is completely at odds with what the liberal liberal nationalists such as Geert Wilders have spoken about in terms of combating the intolerance of certain aspects of multiculturalism and political correctness and jihadism, because jihadism would lead directly to an intolerant society, and the multiculturalists stupidly or suicidally have backed this horse of jihadism, and multiculturalists would be the first to be bumped off. Now, this is some economic reasons behind it, because the migration into Europe of thousands of people is driven by poverty, despair, and dictatorial regimes throughout the world, which are mostly backed by oil or drugs. And so you can understand why people would want to move to a social democratic Europe, which is civilized, has the rule of law, and all the things that this man Breivik rails against. He is against Western civilization. He hates anyone who has anything to do with democracy, and this is not surprising because he's a Freemason. But the economic incentive for people to be multiculturalists is very strong, because many lawyers, as on the France 24 debate, have been getting vast sums of money in the multiculturalist industry to get people into Europe and into the welfare state. And this comes at loggerheads with social democracy itself. Because could these people not possibly be Marxists? Because Marxists want to raise capitalism to its highest level. So they're not actually socialists. I'm a social democrat, and I want social democracy to be sustainable, and also for immigration to be sustainable, but only at 2 or 4% of the birth rate, and for there to be a green card system, as Thilo Sarrazin said. All these different forces, and as I said, Freemasonry has had a powerful influence on politics. Just take the Prime Ministry of Margaret Thatcher, or ultra-conservatism, because they influence ultra-conservatism. Margaret Thatcher was an ultra-conservative, and so the infiltration of organisations such as the BNP and now the EDL is now completed by ultra-conservatives. That's why they're extremely dangerous, and they're traitors to the countries that they arrive in, as Breivik is an example of. Social democracy has to respond by de-radicalising as unpleasant as it may be to social democrats, de-radicalising National Socialists so that they do not become people like Breivik, and bringing them over to social democracy. This will mean some losses in terms of we will have to give up much of multiculturalism, but we have all developed and lived in a multiculturalist society. What we need to do is to make that sustainable, to make a social democracy sustainable, and to make nationalism about patriotism for the EU and the survival of the Nordic, Roman and Celtic peoples in Europe. Patriotism for white people to have an intrinsic racial interest is not immoral. Jewish people, non-Jewish people, all have an interest in their own, and from Africans to Asians to Indians, all have an intrinsic interest in their own racial people's right to survive. A European extinction should not be a mainstream issue that is acceptable that Europeans commit demographic suicide, as one Progress Party member said. But social democracy should be the method by which a properly functioning society works. As a Norwegian foreign minister said, this is Norway. We are not a multicultural society. We are a Norwegian society where everybody should believe in the values of democracy, the rule of law, and liberty and equality.